Now in this session we will see how the web services can be tested. So we know like web services communicate through SOAP, and we also know that web services have a contract called WSDL. So now the WSDL is the key in the communication in the communication to be established between the client and server. How? So that is the one which contains the name of the service, the operation name, and the request and response details. So now there is a easiest way to test web services provided with a website provided the WSDL file. So if I have a WSDL file, I can test the web service through a third-party client software called SOAP UI. So the tool that we are going to use here to test web services is called SOAP UI. It is a client software to test web services. So what we need is, apart from this tool, the WSDL file and the sample request and any credentials and also the endpoint URL. So these are the four important things that we need for testing a web service. We need the WSDL file, we need endpoint URL, we need the credentials, so that's all. So WSDL, endpoint URL, credentials, and the sample request. So with these details, we can test any web service within no time. So let's see how it is. So I'm going to showcase now a web service that has been built or that is used for inquiring the credit score of a customer. So we have a credit agency called Equifax who does the credit rating or credit check for individuals. So any bank may want to know the credit score of their customers. So in such cases, they will require to go to the credit agencies like Equifax and give the details of the customer whom they want to inquire about and request the corresponding service, so that the corresponding Equifax service will provide the credit score with along with uh, other details of the credit history of the customer. So now let's see how it works. So this is the SOAP UI that I have been telling. So in this SOAP UI, I have imported a WSDL, and I'm actually, so when I import, it looks like this actually. So this is the request. This request contains two parts. So this screen contains two parts: request and response. When I click on request on run button, automatically a request will be sent to the server, and we will see the response. So let's see what it is. So what the request contains and what the response contains. So the request contains certain authentication credentials, and it contains the request details. So for whom we are requesting, and the response contains the key part is the score, credit score of the customer is been given here. So that is all banks are interested to know the credit score of this guy. So it is as simple as that. Now let's see in detail how this works when as a fresh project you are just given a web service WSDL file and the other details like endpoint URL and other things. So how will you test it? Now let me show you that. So let me close this session and let's see, cancel this, and let's see from beginning how can we do it. So when we install SOAP UI, you can find that in your programs. Right, SOAP UI is there in your start programs. So just click on it and the SOAP UI will be launched. So now go to file and save new SOAP UI project. So give something here, and for this project the main key is the WSDL file. So let's go to the WSDL. So this is the WSDL file. I just have selected, say OK, that's all. So now as soon as the WSDL has been uploaded to the SOAP UI client software, it recognizes what operations are there in that. So submit, as we see, submit is the operation, and the request is the one which we have to double click. When we double click on request, we see on the right side the screen is divided into two panes. So the first pane is filled with certain sample request information, and the right pane, which is belonging to the response side, is blank. Now the next step we need to do is we have to give the proper endpoint URL and where the service has been deployed. Endpoint URL is the URL where the service provider has published their service. So this is the key information we need to ask for any web service. As I said earlier, after WSDL file, the key information is the endpoint URL. So now let's see for this what is the endpoint URL. The endpoint URL for this is this. So this endpoint URL has to be given by the service provider. Now how will I enter this endpoint URL? So you just have to, on the request side, after these icons there is a title bar or address bar. So we just have to drop it down so that we will see a menu item called edit current. Click on it. Now here we just have to replace the current URL with the actual or the correct endpoint URL and say OK. So now we have set the right endpoint URL. Besides the right endpoint URL, we need to, in order to request server, we need right credentials. The credentials also should be provided by the service provider. So we receive the credentials like this. So where should I give these credentials? In the left hand side, below the project details, there is a request properties section is shown over here. In this, so this is the metadata about the request. So there will be a field called username and password. So here we should provide the username and the password. Here it is WGTC2. So I have set my username, password, endpoint URL, and I'm set with request. So let me to run invoke the web service now. I just have to click the green triangular button so that the request will be submitted to the server, and we received some response in the right hand side. If you see, these are all boolean, invalid. These are all the errors we are seeing actually. So these were all the errors because whatever the request we have sent is not in the right format, because we have not filled any information here in the request side. So but why we didn't fill? So we don't know what information I should provide in those empty fields. That's why we need the sample request. So the sample request also should be given by the client. So now I have the sample request as well. So let me open the sample request XML file. So this is the sample request. So I will just copy this sample request and paste in the request form. So I have deleted the old request, that by default whatever the request has been generated, that I have deleted, and I have just added the original sample request given by the service provider. So in the request, in this request seems to be shorter than the original request, because in the original request there may be many optional fields which might not be required, any value. So we have given only values what is really required here in the sample request. Now if I execute, now request has been again sent and there is some processing is going on. Now we see the response. So now the SOAP response contains the SOAP body, and SOAP response contains some other tags. Now this contains this transaction status is completed, and from here onwards is the response data. We can see this is all response data. This is all that belongs to the response data. All the response will be under the SOAP body. So what is that we are looking here, as this service will be invoked only for knowing the, mainly to know the credit score of the customer. So let's focus on what it is. So here we find the score of the customer as 761, but the other information also might be important, but so we're not going to concentrate on all those things. But while we are testing on particular field, we will focus what is my score, whichever the fields we are interested to know or to test, that those fields will be tested thoroughly, and if any issues, if any data is not coming as expected, those things will be reported as issues. So that's all for now. So that is all about how to test web services in SOAP UI. So let's recap again what we have done. So for SOAP, for testing any web service, we need 4 important things to test through SOAP UI. So the first most important thing is SOAP UI. Second is the WSDL file. Endpoint URL. Endpoint URL is the URL where the service is published. And then the credentials. Credentials are the username, passwords. Password to invoke the server or to send a request to the server, and a sample request XML file. As you see that both the request and response are in XML, because they are using these requests and response have been communicated through SOAP. We see them. So every SOAP request contains a header and a body. Similarly, a SOAP response contains a mandatory body. So and then once we receive the WSDL file, so we just have to create a new SOAP UI project, then import the WSDL file, and then then update the endpoint URL by clicking on the drop down, say edit current, and then endpoint URL is set, then username password has been set, then request has been updated, then click on this green icon so that request will be sent. So that is all. But one more important thing is about the web service XML files. So the WSDL file is a simple WSDL file we have given, but in the same WSDL file where we are seeing some other files also. So when I am selecting WSDL file, so I am selecting this WSDL file. Besides this, there are some XSD files. What these XSD files contains? XSD stands for XML schema definition. So as we all see in the WSDL file, we are seeing some XML some elements just defined, just declared, but they have not been declared. So if you see here, submit request has been just declared as an IC interconnect request. What is the full form of it? Because this is not a simple type. This is a complex type which involves many other elements as chains. So how will we know all this information? Where all this information has been embedded or wrapped? All that information is embedded in these XSD files. So what we have to do is we should maintain the WSDL files and XSD files in the same directory when we are importing that in the SOAP UI project. Now if I search here for this interconnect request, I will find in one of these XSD files contains the definition of it. So here if I see, there are 2 XSDs containing the definitions of it. So let me search again. So this is not containing it. So maybe the other one might be containing the definition of it. There we go. So here the element interconnect request has been declared as of type interconnect request type. So now we have to, and this, the definition of this is given over here. So it is a complex type of with the name this one, and this is containing again all whatever the information here we are seeing all belongs to this particular request. So all this, so that means the WSDL and this XSD file should be co-located in the same directory. Then only our SOAP UI can recognize all those elements and can create the proper request. So now by now we are clear on how to use SOAP UI and what is WSDL, what is SOAP, and what is XSD.